Welcome to another edition of Beyond Rose Hill, joined by Fordham women's basketball alum Patty Williams Downs, now the executive director at OneGoal. I'm Emmanuel Barbari with you. Patty, good to be with you.
It's great to be with you. This is exciting, Emmanuel.
Very exciting. And your efforts at OneGoal right now sums up in one sentence: working to ensure every young person has an equitable opportunity to achieve their greatest post-secondary aspirations. Why don't you run us through a little bit of what your day-to-day is like in your current job?
Yeah. So I always feel like I wear like 30 different hats. And so I'm like, how do you say this succinctly? Um, but essentially, it would be, let me sort of back up to say more about why we exist, and then the role that I play will sort of situate really well within that. So you just described exactly what our aim is, but our aim is that because there is an incredibly difficult and staggering degree divide. Nationally, we know that only 22% of students who identify as low income or with the low socioeconomic status will complete a post-secondary degree, compared to 67% of their more affluent peers, right? So we're looking at this sort of 3x or multiplier effect simply because your zip code and your financial resources, right? And we know how what a college degree or a credential can actually do to transform your life and generations of your life. And essentially, OneGoal just said, like, that's not okay. That is like wildly unacceptable. And so OneGoal is a national enterprise. We exist in 6 different states across the country. It started in Chicago. And Chicago has a very specific demographic, largely African American, and they had incredible success there. Our Chicago team is legit. And the question was, can we do this somewhere else in a demographic that looked a little different? And we had some evangelists, some really incredible people who said, like, come to Houston right now. Yes, this could work here. And in Houston, the demographic is, Hispanic and African American students. And so it was sort of to create a second proof point, and there was born OneGoal Houston, because in Houston, a couple of years ago, that divide wasn't 22% to 67%. It was 9% to 86%. So it was like, okay, we have work to do. We have to like get on the ground and get going. And so I'm the executive director of OneGoal Houston, leading the region. And I would say what I do primarily is I lead the vision, direction, and strategy for our ability to close that divide. So that means understanding our growth strategy, essentially, like literally numerically, how many students do we need to serve to bring down that divide? What is the capability of our financial resources, sort of leveraged by our board and our ability to raise and acquire a significant amount of funding, and then our internal operations. So it's like leading a team of about 20 people internally to deliver those services for kids across Houston. So on a day-to-day basis, it can be honestly like a mashup of like any of those things, right? So it's like I can go from connecting with my team internally to connecting with a board member to connecting with our larger organization, all trying to figure out how to advance the mission at a rapid pace so that we can see the degree divide close in our lifetime.
Before we get into a little more of your background, I think something you just mentioned is important to circle back to, and that's the mission of OneGoal. And I find the name very interesting, OneGoal, because when you talk about divides or injustice in America, it can seem multifaceted and complex at times. How much do you think it helps that you're honing in on one issue that can potentially solve many?
That's a great question. So we see OneGoal as a tide that lifts many boats, right? So we do consider ourselves a late intervention program, right? So more specifically, like what differentiates us in the market of post-secondary services is that we only support students who are in the middle 50%. So students who identify as having a C average, so not the top performing students who identify with the low socioeconomic status or the bottom, but students who probably said, I may or may not graduate high school. I don't sort of see this vision for myself. The what data shows us is that without a post-secondary degree or credential, your odds are significantly limited. Not just your career path, but your financial future, your health is even impacted, right? And so uh, having access to post-secondary degree or credential allows you to amass social capital, financial capital. It allows you to build generational wealth. It is that tide that can lift many, many boats. I think what's also important to note is we have one goal, which is how we're able to sort of narrow in, which is really hard for nonprofits, by the way. Okay. Because nonprofits, we want to do all the things, right? Everything that's on fire, we want to go out and we want to like solve it. And what I love about what we do, as you said, the title of our company is really trying to say, how do we leverage all of our resources to solve this one thing? What is also important to know is there are many paths to that one goal. And so we don't discount that. So we try to meet students where they are and say, give them the most access to information that allows them to make the best decision for themselves and their family. And whether that's 4-year, 2-year technical certification, it is not our job to determine that for them. It is our job to help them meet their dreams. That is what equity really is, right? We're not shoehorning kids to a specific output. It's our job to say, let us help you make the most informed decision. So we see post-secondary access as sort of this linchpin from K through 12 to help students really access a life that comes with more choice.
You come out of school as a college athlete, you're looking towards your career. I'm sure you didn't always know that this is where you would wind up. You go to Teach for America. How did that stint change your life?
Oh, completely. So I'm 21. I'm at the prestigious Fordham University. And I'm from East Orange, New Jersey. Very, very proud to be from there, right? So I'm kind of smelling myself. You know, I'm feeling really, really great about knowing all the things and what the next 10 years of my life is going to look like. I had that all wrapped up, Emmanuel. Like, I mean, in the most arrogant way. And what the goal was to go to law school, right? And so I was going to go to law school, do Teach for America and defer 2 years and then go to law school, because I've always been driven by missions that are steeped in equity and justice, right? And I had the privilege of only growing deeper in those convictions at Fordham, right? Because Fordham is so steeped in service and serving all for the better good of the collective community. And so it was like a no-brainer to me, right, to go into law, because what I wanted to do was fight a system that was unjustly imprisoning young Black males. And I felt very strongly like, that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to do. Until I got to that classroom the very first day. And I could never unsee my students. I could never unhear their stories, their silent cries, their dreams, their bold dreams, their parents' dreams for them. And I knew that I was never going to be able to turn away from that thing. And I made the decision very early on in teaching that I wasn't going to go to law school, that I was actually going to essentially make teaching and education my new basketball court. It was my new journey. It was my new social justice and my equity in a way to fight.
So much of what you just said, I think, goes back to when I was reading a little bit more about your background, the phrase, what more can I do? How much did that drive every decision from that point forward?
Yeah. So this is such a great question, because I've thought about this a lot. And what more can I do? I've actually sort of iterated on that a bit and said, how can I do more better? And the way I can articulate this is by tracing it back to my own origin story, to then sort of catapult to what has that meant for me over a series of a couple of decades. Now I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm like almost 20 years out. It's like, it's crazy how fast it goes. But yeah, how that has transpired. And so I'm from East Orange, New Jersey, and that place for me means so much. It is a tale of a beauty and a beast. The beauty of it is a small town, and there is love, there's community, there's loyalty, there's camaraderie, there's a sense of extreme resourcefulness, because we actually didn't have very many means and resources. And so we relied on what we had in each other. I mean, I remember people giving their last dime to support my athletic journey. People who would show up at a moment's notice to cheer for me at a basketball game, 2 hours from home, and make every effort to be there. I mean, I came from a place where people believed in people so much that they would compromise and sacrifice their own dreams to make others happen. And with that, our community was saddled with systems that did not serve us well. And it caused some real torrential downpour. I mean, for example, there were really high crime rates in East Orange. And that was a beast. So it was both this, and multiple things can be true, which is what I'm putting on the table, that while I grew up with a ton of really great assets for my community, it was still very challenged. And I knew early on, Emmanuel, that I wanted more for kids who grew up in similar circumstances where means were challenged. Because I knew early on that this wasn't right, right? I was like, there's no way that your zip code should predict your entire life. That sounds ridiculous. Without knowing much about, all the systems at play and all the things, I was just like, this isn't right. And so I had that internal sort of compass and dialogue with myself often that led me to ask that question: how can I fight and do more, better, to ensure that this experience feels different for thousands and hopefully millions of kids over their lifetime? So I had these questions. How can I help kids have more access to education that is not inherently blocked by systems? How can I help make sure that people have access to fundamental goods so that food insecurity is not a thing? How to make sure people have access to financial resources? So I had those questions and they just became louder and louder and louder, right? And honestly, it became my North Star and my guide. So it was only natural that I went to a place like Fordham University, right, to help me understand how to make sense of that, put language to it, develop a sense of a network of people, be challenged by a curriculum that asks me tougher questions. Well, how do you do that? What are the conflicts with that? How do you do that outside of these gates? And I felt really privileged, having been groomed in that way and connected to people who could support that journey. And it was then natural for me to go to TFA, right? It's like the same thing. It's like you compete and you serve and you lead. And those were continuous themes. And so from there, the journey went to how can I do more, better? So becoming a teacher was like 30 kids, right? And I was like, this is great. How can I do more? I'm going to teach middle school because you get to teach 120 kids, right? It's like best case. I did that and I was like, so I want to do more and do it better. And so I went to become a leader of a campus because I was like, okay, that's like thousands of kids. And literally, Emmanuel, that is been my mindset, is like, let me find a more complex challenge and try to serve more kids. So from there, I was able to work in some really awesome charter networks, KIP and Yes Prep in Houston, and serve at a system level. And here was the catch. How I got to OneGoal was I had always worked in K through 12 settings. And it was fun to serve those like challenges that are presented in a K through 12, as I just described. And I remember sitting in a meeting and them saying, yeah, so we're going to share some data about our students enrolling, persisting, and completing college. And I was like, oh yeah, this is great. Like, this is what we do. Because we had this 100% enrollment rate for years when I worked at Yes Prep. And they were like, yeah, our completion rate is 50%. And I was like, what? It's a coin toss if you complete when you leave here? And they were like, yeah, it's the highest in the country. And I was like, what? That became the new problem. So it's like, well, I want to go there. I want to go solve that problem. I want to make sure that more kids have access and that number is not 50%. And so when I learned that number was 50% and it was high, and as I just shared, in Houston, it was 9% for the kids across Houston, I was like, yeah, I have to change lanes. And so that's what led me to serve at OneGoal Houston.
That passion, that ambition to grow, you stem back to your time at Fordham and Fordham women's basketball, a program that's grown so much over the years. What characteristics, what traits do you think being an athlete instilled in you and led you on this journey?
Yeah. So this is such a great question. I would say my experience being a student athlete at Fordham taught me three things. It taught me how to practice these three things: practice hope, practice strategy, and practice building and living and leveraging community. And so I know the first two sound kind of desperate or disparate. And so I'll unpack that. But hope was a practice. I mean, as a student athlete, you succeed and fail like every 10 minutes publicly. Right. And it's division one. And so it is extremely rigorous, right? Like you have to show up every minute of every day. You have to go to study hall if you want to be eligible to play. You have to show up on the court for practice if you want to play in the game. And then you have to show up in the game in order to support your team and going really far. And so there were definitely peaks that we had and valleys. And this practice of saying we have to be better in the moment, despite what we're seeing, because we have to hope that there is a better horizon. And so I remember we would go on, we had in every year we had a losing stretch, right? And I mean, when I say losing stretch, I mean, it's relative. Like a 2-game losing stretch feels terrible as much as like a 20-game losing, like losing as a competitive athlete just feels horrible. But we experienced that and I had to practice hope. Translating that into this world is educational equity is an exhausting responsibility. And there has to be this practice that there is hope for a better future so that you don't exhaust yourself trying to ride the ride for a long time. I think the second thing, strategy, is honestly just like the intellectual chops. It was like I felt very academically challenged in the best ways possible at Fordham. And so, taking really rigorous business classes and sociology classes, sort of two ends of the spectrum, right? Like social impact and like actual finance and numbers and operations and auditing. And I'm saying that because it feels kind of blocky sometimes. But I had a curriculum that helped me grow in so many ways that I had learning agility. I knew that I sort of developed this insatiable appetite to say, while there are answers, there are always more questions. And I take that into me being a nonprofit leader, that we are never satisfied with our work. It drives my team absolutely crazy. I mean, but by all definite, it drives them insane where they're like, are we really not done? I'm like, no, we're really not done. Because we will, especially now with the pandemic, we are having to innovate in high, fast clips in ways that we haven't before. And that's fine with me because we have to answer the question, are we holding our promises true to our kids? If we can't say confidently that our services are doing that, then we have to scrap it and we have to go in a different direction. But I learned how to do that at Fordham because there was this expectation that you would continue to grow and learn. And then I would say the last one is community. Is Fordham, the athletic community is incredibly strong, but also the student body community, and it's incredibly supportive and connected. And so I learned, if you wanted to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And that was such a human experience for me at Fordham. And it's exactly what I do now. My team is very sick of me using sports examples and examples at Fordham to explain vision and direction. But now they're just kind of used to it. They kind of just roll their eyes. But it was such a great experience. And I'm easily able to translate how to build a community, leverage it to move forward as a unit.
Patty Williams Downs, appreciate a few minutes, appreciate all your thoughts and efforts, and thanks for joining Beyond Rose Hill.
Thank you so much. This was great. I appreciate it.